Welcome to section 4 of our marketing and sales bootcamp. This is all about branding. Why is branding so important? Well, branding has always been important. It was important 100 years ago when Kodak first developed, even though Kodak is no longer around today. Branding is even more important today because there are so many other companies chasing after the same consumer that you are also targeting. So, with all this competition, you absolutely have to have a rock solid brand in order to stand out and get noticed, and of course, to get purchased. So, how do you stand out in a cluttered marketplace? Well, the easiest way to define your brand and have it evolve is to think of your brand as being a person. So, just like any person, whether you are on an online dating site or you have to design a package that will sit on the shelf of a store, what do you have to do to make your brand stand out? What is your personality? So that is comprised of your voice. What do you say? How do you talk? What kind of lingo do you use? What's your visual? How do you look? What colors do you use? And what are your values? What do you stand for? What do you represent? All of these things combined are seen as being your brand. Maybe you've seen this video before. It's a parody of what the iPod packaging would look like if Microsoft had created it. It came out quite a while ago, as the iPod did, but every time I watch this video, I'm guaranteed to laugh repeatedly. So it's very funny. I do suggest you Google it and watch it on YouTube. And the reason I show this is because easily 99.9% of my small business clients all tell me they admire Apple, they want to be like Apple. And if they are already in business and have a website and maybe a brochure or a business card, 99.9% of the time they look more like Microsoft. So you can understand why there's a big disconnect, both in what they say and then obviously what they're projecting out to the marketplace. Now, this is not to say that you should always be like Apple. Apple is a very distinct brand and a very distinct industry. And I don't say this because I love Apple so much more than Microsoft. I actually use both products. I love both products. They both have pros and cons. So it's just to say that you can have a brand that is very stark, simple, clean, like the Apple box on the left hand side, as opposed to being cluttered and busy and standing for so many things that no one really knows what you're trying to say on the right hand side with Microsoft. So think about this in advance and then decide, what is it? What is that number one thing that you really want to convey to your customers? We've already mentioned that your brand image consists of three things: values, voice, and visual. Let's talk a little bit more about visual. And even though visual is listed as number 3 on this list, it may actually be number 1. Because I recall hearing years ago of a study that showed people notice shapes and images and colors before they actually read letters or numbers. And if you think about cult brands like Nike, Nike rarely even shows their brand name. All they need to do is have that iconic swoosh, and you know instantly that it's Nike. And there are many other logos that have achieved similar success. Lululemon, Target. If you think about their logos, they represent the entire brand without having to use letters as well. So consider how important your visual is to defining your brand. And a qualified designer will truly understand the psychology of color. So we have some examples on the left-hand side. And a lot of this is probably intuitive to you. You probably think of sunny, warm colors as being yellow or orange, and sure enough, they are. But also think about, what are your competitors doing? If you are in IT or tech, that industry tends to have a lot of blues, a lot of silver, because those colors are associated with strength, trust, dependability. Silver is listed as being calm, but I think it also seen as being a technically advanced color. It's technology. If everyone that you compete with is using shades of silver and blue, you might actually want to be really different and have a different color. So as much as you want to adhere to the psychology of color, you also don't want to forget that you're competing against other brands in a cluttered marketplace. In defining your brand even further, think of your brand as a person. We talked about that earlier. It's easier to define a person and describe their characteristics than it would be to an inanimate object that you may be selling. So if you think of your brand as a person, it's your baby. After all, you have to rear it and bring it to market. Define it in those terms. And who is your celebrity association? This I find is a really interesting question, and I've heard so many amazing answers from clients. Everything from uh, everyone you see there, Oprah, James Bond, and Tom Hanks, to I think I've had the Pope and Michelle Obama. So I've heard a really eclectic mix of celebrity associations with my past clients. But this really does say a lot. If you decide that you want to be a touching, caring brand that is very thought provoking, you will definitely want to position yourself more like an Oprah than perhaps a James Bond. So when you think about these associations, if you think about how Oprah would brand herself, you can also apply that same thinking and strategy towards your personal branding. Now, importantly, if you are selling a service, you're basically selling yourself. It's about personal branding. You are the brand. And what distinguishes your brand from everyone else? Because it can get pretty crowded in the marketplace. I know myself as a marketing consultant, there are lots of marketing consultants out there. Similarly, if you are back to that yoga instructor, you could be a contractor, a designer, a realtor. There are a lot of people in that same field. What's going to make you different? How is your visual, your voice, or your values? What are you saying and putting out there different? And I've chosen three examples of three very different people that have very different platforms. Whether it's Bob Marley, Oprah, or the infamous Donald Trump, these three individuals all have very strong personal brands. What is it that defines you? And lastly, when you think about your values, part of your values as a brand are your social and environmental footprint. And this is increasingly important in today's world. And studies have shown that not only is it important to differentiate you from competitors, it actually is important to your customers. They actually are more likely to buy a brand that has meaning, or that gives back, or that does good, or discloses how they were made or where the product ingredients came from. This is increasingly more and more important to today's customers. So consider this when you create your brand. One of my favorite brands is The Body Shop, and it's evolved since when it used to be much more of an edgy, radical brand, especially back in the 80s and 90s when it first came out. But the late, great founder, Anita Roddick, who unfortunately passed away from cancer many years ago, she said this, and I'll let her words speak because it's very eloquently said. If you do things well, do them better. Be daring, be first, be different, and be just. And that really was the principle she applied behind The Body Shop. And I would actually encourage you, if you read any books about The Body Shop in its early days, you'll really appreciate how she really embodied what we talked about, being daring, first, different, and just in the early days of starting her brand. So how do we apply this to real life? Well, let's go back to our Natraz example, our African American hair care product line. And what I did was I looked at comparable brands to what I thought should be their desired branding, or the best branding for them based on the consumer target and owning that white space amongst the competition. And all the brands that I looked at, whether it was Dove or Apple or a line of iced tea that had ingredients for health benefits, everything that I looked at was quite vibrant and rich with meaning. These weren't passive brands. They were very active and engaging brands, and they were vibrant both in their voice and in their visual, but as well as in their colors and in their values, what they were saying. And then I took it further and looked at celebrity associations. And you may or may not recognize some of these women, but they are definitely women. Even if you don't recognize them, you would look at them and say, wow, these are pretty confident, strong, funky women. They have hair that is on their own terms. They may literally defy gravity. It's funky, it's spunky. They're definitely women who are very confident in their skin, literally and metaphorically. So that was what I felt was the right association for our new brand. This is how the brand currently looks, and unfortunately, I'll I'll give away the ending. The brand did not uh, develop new packaging due to cost constraints. But what I really envisioned for the brand was packaging that was really vibrant to go along with the positioning. So if you can imagine potentially having clear plastic bottles or white bottles, because I think that was a better way to describe natural. Instead of using a green bottle, which I know the client felt green symbolized natural, I felt that a dark green bottle was actually quite unattractive and ugly. And if you are a natural product, I actually think you should be white or clear plastic, so you have nothing to hide. That was more my approach. If you really are natural, then prove it on the inside and the out with your packaging. So let people see what's inside the bottle and the color of the ingredients. But then have bright, vibrant packaging that really helps you pop. This would help you pop not only if you're on a shelf with other brands beside you, but just in light of being an e-commerce website, what'll make you really stand out. And I think because we had great research about the consumer, how we already know women define themselves through their hair, but for Black women, their hair was much more than just having a hair day. It really spoke a lot into their personality and made a statement about who they were and how they felt about themselves. So they could have had so much fun with the branding. Oh well, in the next lifetime. So this wraps up our section for my brand. And now I encourage you to fill out all the information about your brand. So what are your brand values? What do you think your brand visual should be? And what's your brand voice? What do you want to say and how are you going to say it? What brands are similar to yours right now? What are those comparable brands? And sometimes this is an easier way to answer the questions above. If you know who you want to be like, they could be in a similar industry, they could be in a totally different industry. But if you know who you want to be like, then it's easier to determine how to create a brand like that. And my favorite question is always, if my brand was a celebrity, it would be like blank, because he or she represents blankety blank. So again, this might be a bit challenging. I will admit that for some of my male clients in particular, my techie clients, they find this question quite challenging. But I think if you do your homework here, it makes it much easier moving forward. So think about who you want to be like if you're not already like that individual, and then we'll figure out how to package yourself like that brand or like that celebrity. Don't forget how important your environmental footprint is. It's increasingly important. And how do you give back to the community? Next, we'll move on to section 5, my marketing plan.